These summits are about choreography, and staircases compose a challenge. The host flings off his jacket in youthful exuberance. The president hates descending, even from small heights. And the new guy on the block is still finding his way.
Where's breakfast, mate?
But nothing is as tricky as trying to stay in sync with Donald Trump and his phobias. Watch that body language.
You know who this is? Does everybody know? He's going to be a fantastic prime minister, I can tell you.
This is Boris Johnson presented as prize winner.
We're going to do a fantastic deal once we clear up some of the obstacles in our path.
And the message from the understudy, haven't I done well? Look at me. Earlier they huddled over breakfast. It was the Prime Minister's most important eyeball-to-eyeball to date, with his special and post-Brexit arguably indispensable friend.
This is a person that's going to be a great prime minister, in my opinion. Boris, it's only my opinion.
No, look, I'm not going to dissent. I'm not going to discourage you from that, Donald. But obviously, I have memories of American trade negotiations in the past, and I have a formidable respect for U.S. trade negotiations. And I know that there will be some tough talks ahead, because at the moment, you know, we still don't. I don't think we sell a single joint of British lamb to the United States. We don't sell any beef. We don't sell any pork pies. And there are clearly huge opportunities for the UK to penetrate the American market in the way that we currently do.
A pork pie portion of muscle from the new Prime Minister amid all the backslapping. A trade war between China and the US, that is the last thing a Britain desperately seeking new trade deals needs.
Are your allies pressuring you to give up the trade war with China?
No, not at all. I haven't heard that. I think they respect the trade war. It has to happen. China's been, I can only speak for the United States. I can't say what they've been doing to the UK and to other places, but from the standpoint of the United States, what they've done is outrageous.
Just to register the faint sheep-like note of our view on the trade war, we're in favour of trade peace on the whole.
The deserted Biarritz streets outside, an eerie vision of the kind of economic void the world can expect if a trade war goes global and viral. And so to the Prime Minister's other big bilateral today, with the other Donald Tusk, the outgoing president of the European Council. Is the man on the left fuming because the one on the right has just told him that he won't pay the $39 billion divorce bill if there is no deal? Even the thunderous mood diffused by Johnson's verbal tonics, being disarming, is still his best weapon. Boris Johnson has been almost combustible with good cheer.
Well done. Bien joué.
I'm not finished.
You're doing well. You did very well last night, though. My God, that was a difficult one. You did brilliant.
And almost infectious. The world may be in a delicate state. A trade war beckons. Alliances are on the retreat. Democracy's in peril. But Mr. Johnson wasn't letting on. Chair swiveled, eyes wide, as if he can't quite believe that he's actually here. Now, Western policy towards Iran is one of the most contentious issues at this summit, pitting Donald Trump against all the others. It really is a question of G1 against G6. Well, this afternoon, the French sprung a bit of a surprise on their guests by inviting the Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Zarif here. They told all the participants that this would be happening, including the Americans. Full transparency, they said. There are no plans, as far as we know, to bring the Iranians and the Americans together. That would indeed be historic, and it might just be a bit too much for Donald Trump to handle at the moment. But by bringing them into each other's orbit, the French are hoping, yes, hoping, to diffuse some of the tension and rekindle the diplomatic process here. Now, before we go, normally at these summits, we get to sit down with the Prime Minister and do an interview. And we certainly came on this trip fully expecting to conduct such a taped conversation. Last night, Number 10 pulled our interview in protest against a speech given by the head of news and current affairs at Channel 4. This is unprecedented on such a diplomatic trip, at least for us. We have complained, and my colleague Robert Peston from ITV News asked the Prime Minister about it.
And today,
You're refusing to be interviewed by
Yeah, well,
Channel 4 News.
I'm being interviewed by you.
Channel 4 News.
I've just subjected myself to almost...
Haven't you just shot yourself in the foot on this?
Not in this. I'm delighted to be interviewed by you, Robert. It's the highest honour that it's one of the high honours that a politician can have. But I have to. I'm afraid once this ceremony is over, I have to go and talk to French radio, French TV, and lots of other outlets as well. And I'm looking forward to that.
Well, the sun is now slowly setting on Biarritz, and who knows whether Boris Johnson will take another swim in these choppy waters behind me tomorrow morning. But he can reassure himself that so far, at least, he's had a good summit, a good debut on the international stage. He certainly seemed to charm his colleagues, and that matters in diplomatic circles. But what that will yield in the long term, in these crucial months, no one can say. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Matt. Well, what exactly is behind Iran's presence at the G7 summit? Earlier, I spoke to Trita Parsi, who's Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute and the author of a number of books on US-Iran relations. I began by asking him how much of a surprise Mr. Zarif's appearance was.
It certainly seems to be a surprise to a lot of folks, including some of the Europeans there, but it's also difficult to imagine that Zarif himself would have agreed to come unless there had been some indication of openness from Trump's side to the proposal that Macron has put forward.
So are you saying that you think President Trump will have in some way agreed to this? Because the Trump administration only recently imposed sanctions and travel restrictions personally on the Iranian foreign minister. So it's hard to see how they'd be pleased with him pitching up in Biarritz.
Certainly, there's a massive contradiction there, and I think it really shows the ineffectiveness of those sanctions on Zarif, and the fact that the French are willing to bring Zarif to Paris or to France during this meeting shows how isolated the Trump administration is when it comes to its maximum pressure strategy. But if we look at what has been reported on Macron's proposal, it essentially means that Trump would back off from some of the latest sanctions and reissue waivers, allowing the Iranians to once again be able to sell their oil in return for the Iranians to go back into full compliance with the nuclear deal.
But there doesn't seem to be any suggestion from the noises coming out of the Trump administration that that might be true. I mean, President Trump, when asked about the Iranian foreign minister arriving a while ago, said no comment. And this is from a president who usually has something to say about everything.
Certainly, and I would myself be somewhat surprised if he goes along with this, mindful of the immense opposition that will come from Bolton and Pompeo to any effort towards diplomacy. I mean, their dedication to diplomacy is only at the rhetorical level, according to Bolton himself. So this may actually have been aimed at creating increasing divisions within the Trump administration, because there is a clear division there between someone like Trump, who has gone along with this strategy but seems to actually want to have diplomacy. He just doesn't understand how diplomacy is conducted. And then people like Bolton and others who are using the strategy not for the sake of diplomacy, but for the sake of an escalation that can lead all the way to a war.
Any danger at all, do you think, of the Americans actually talking or engaging in any way with the Iranian foreign minister on this trip?
Well, I personally don't think there's going to be any direct negotiations between the U.S. And Iran. I don't think Zarif is in a position to take that political risk at home of engaging directly with Trump, mindful of what Trump has done. But I don't see any backlashing risk of mediators such as Macron or others coming in and trying to diffuse the situation and de-escalate it. I think that is sorely needed. There's a greater risk of not doing these things. There's a greater risk of just sitting on the sidelines and watch this move towards a military confrontation.
Trita Parsi, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.